This is Newsroom. Hello and welcome from Johannesburg in South Africa. I'm Anine Dormel, standing in for Eben Janssen. The show is live and broadcast from our studios in Auckland Park. We're also streaming live on YouTube with the entire show available on our YouTube channel. Now, as Springbok selectors prepare to announce their team for this weekend's test against Argentina, the debate over rugby transformation is in the spotlight after claims that players of colours are being sidelined. As we take a closer look at this, we ask you today, is transformation in our national sport teams lagging? Send your views to @SABC Newsroom on Twitter. Then, corruption in South Africa's schools is a stark reality. We talk to Corruption Watch about this. And the European Union is facing a massive migrant crisis, and we'll be joined by Amnesty International to take a look at the challenge European countries are currently faced with. But first, here's a look at the day's news. President Jacob Zuma yesterday said that government is ready to launch its new plan to save billions of rands in water wastage, as well as create thousands of jobs. The president was speaking at the presidential guest house on a range of issues he raised during his State of the Nation address in February. Zuma highlighted the effect of job losses, the electricity crisis, and the new visa regulations on the economy. The new plan is expected to be launched in Port Elizabeth at the end of this month. The families of 37 mine workers killed in Marikana are taking on Police Minister Nathi Nhleko in the Pretoria High Court. The families are represented by the Socio-Economic Rights Institute of South Africa, the Legal Resources Centre and Wits Law Clinic filed papers in court yesterday. According to the representatives, the families are living in dire conditions and are therefore claiming compensation. The National Board of Police Commissioners will this morning appear before Parliament's Portfolio Committee on Police. The board will explain their public support for National Police Commissioner Ria Piecha. All 9 provincial commissioners earlier issued a media statement in support of Piecha following President Jacob Zuma's request for her to provide reasons for her fitness to hold office. Meanwhile, Deputy Minister Cyril Ramaphosa, or Deputy President, is expected to take questions from members of Parliament in the National Assembly today. Ramaphosa will answer questions related to the human resource development strategy, in which a strong relationship between the industry and training colleges is needed. Ramaphosa will also answer questions on the new visa regulations, his recent state visit to China, and his SADC facilitation efforts in Lesotho. The Fuel Retailers Association says the fuel situation in Gauteng seems to be improving and should be resolved in the next few days. This after more than 100 filling stations in the country or in the province ran dry. Together with the planned shutdown at the engine refinery in Durban, disruptions broke out at one of the country's leading refineries, causing the countrywide shortage. And the death toll has risen to 50 after a bomb exploded in a busy Nigerian market yesterday. The explosion struck in the town of Sobongari in the Borno State, which is the heartland of the terrorist group Boko Haram. No individual group has yet claimed responsibility for the attack. Hundreds of people have been killed in recent weeks by suspected members of the terrorist group. And finally, some of the debris recovered from the crash site of Malaysia Airlines flight MH17 in eastern Ukraine may be fragments of a Russian-made missile system. This is according to the Dutch prosecutors leading the international investigation. MH17 crashed over territory held by pro-Russian rebels in July last year, killing 298 on board. Now, with just 37 days to the start of the Rugby World Cup, the South African Rugby Union is refusing to confirm whether or not it was investigating claims that 5 Black Springboks had approached COSATU, voicing concerns over team selections. Since the dawn of democracy, transformation has been on the agenda for many sporting codes. Many have, however, cried foul about the slow transformation process. In light of the claims from COSATU, and to take this discussion further, from Cape Town today, we are joined by our SABC sports reporter Craig Murray. And in Johannesburg, we're joined from the Anti-Racism Rugby Committee spokesperson, Dr. Asad Barat. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me this morning.
Good morning.
I just want to hear from you. Craig, are you ready to join us in Cape Town? Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, great to be with you guys.
Okay. Craig, I would actually just like to start with you, specifically around the timing of these claims that COSATU have now come out with. There have been talks around every single time we perform badly as a Springbok team, it's almost like we want to go back and find something. And some say we always do tend to go back to the transformation issue. What do you make of the timing? What do you make of SARU's response at this stage?
Well, there's no doubt when you're winning the games that cracks get papered over. But it's something that's been building up for a long time since Heineke Meyer has taken over. When it comes to transformation, he's been way behind the 8 ball. And if you look at even Jake White and then Peter de Villiers, things certainly improved a little bit. But it's unacceptable in 1995 when South Africa won the World Cup and the Madiba Magic. There was one black player on the field, that was Chester Williams. And then on Saturday, losing to Argentina for the first time, there were 2 black players. So to have one extra player in 20 years is clearly unacceptable. And it just seems at the moment that Heineke Meyer has carte blanche when it comes to South African rugby. You know, that he doesn't seem to be buying into transformation. And it's not as if there aren't black players to choose from. COSATU make a very good point that if any team has dominated in SA Rugby over the last 3-4 years when Heineke Meyer has been the Springbok coach, has been Western Province and the Stormers, and they've got a 50%, if not more, when it comes to their team's players of colour. But the likes of, let's say, Jean de Jong or Cheslin Colby, Sabelo Sinatla, they haven't even made it into the Springbok squad. And then the black players that are there haven't had an opportunity because there are 40 players at the camp. He's got to take 31 players to the World Cup. So at least you want to give an Alton Yankees or Skara Intabeni or Sia Khaleesi. They haven't had any game time on the field to even stake a claim to get to the World Cup. And then obviously when you're playing a largely white team and they're not doing very well, then obviously the critics will come out.
Craig, I would actually, Dr. Asad as well, I would like to put this question to the both of you. Like you've mentioned, Craig, the process of transformation is one that cannot happen overnight. We saw the Minister of Sport, Fikile Mbalula, he tweeted yesterday, I hope we can throw that tweet up on screen, that it really is a process that takes time. But why is it taking so long, Dr. Asad, and what do you make of the fact that we have to wait so long to see this kind of change in our national sports teams?
The story that SA Rugby has been telling us for the last 21 years, since the dawn of democracy, as you say, 23 years since the Unity Agreement, that story is in fact a lie. And I think that's at the crux of this issue. Timing we can talk about. COSATU has raised the concerns on the back of concerns that black players have raised from within the squad. So the timing is purely based on that. But the transformation lie that SARU has put forward over the last 21 years is unfolding in front of their eyes. They have, since 1995, presented transformation plan after transformation plan. There's been at least 5 of them. Each one of them have had a different name, the last one being the strategic transformation plan that they've put forward. That plan specifically talks about 50% representation at Currie Cup level, at Super 15 level, and a 30% plus at Springbok level in 2015. So that plan, which was presented recently, has already become obsolete. All their plans sit on dusty shelves. They're not implemented. There's no motivation to implement it. There's no initiative to implement it. There is an agenda that we obviously don't understand in terms of rugby. But the fact must be told, and more people are understanding this. There are more and more people around the country beginning to understand that this lie that's being told to us is a lie. We have had yesterday in George, rugby communities attempting to burn the Springbok shirt. This has happened for the first time. If you look at Newlands has become an all-black home ground in all effect. And I think Springbok Rugby, at some stage, and the custodians of rugby in this country, which is SARU, have got to look at what is the reality. Let's be honest with ourselves, because if we're not honest with ourselves, we can't go forward.
Craig, I want to ask you then, what do you make of Dr. Assad's statement now saying that we're basically faced with a transformation lie, and that I'm sure that since we won the World Cup in 2007, there's so much more that could have been done to make sure that we do have full transformation or have more players of colours with our team going to the World Cup this year?
I mean, the situation is clearly unacceptable. But I wouldn't go so far as to just, run down South Africa and SARU. There are obviously some deeply ingrained problems. But when you look at the junior teams, and that's been going on for quite a long time, at least a decade, when you get the under 18, the under 20, representation with black players then will be even up to 50%. But there seems to be a problem when it gets to Springbok level. So the coach has to buy into the Springbok coach. And certainly Heineke Meyer, judging by his actions, he hasn't bought into transformation. So the talent is there. And SARU do spend a lot of money on development programs. As I say, it happens at the junior levels. But there's also a myth that black people don't have a culture of rugby, which is either just very racist or very ignorant, because there's a rich culture of rugby in the Eastern Cape amongst coloured people, amongst Muslim people. There have been some wonderful players. So there definitely, at the moment, seems to be like an injustice that the playing fields aren't level. And you can't, I'm a bit disappointed in the Minister of Sport, Mr. Razmataz. He's very sporadic and then gets on. At the moment, I think it's got a lot to do with the World Cup is 30, 40 days away. So you don't want to have a major upheaval now. That'll be, you've invested 4 years in this coach. So at some stage the minister will then get all gung-ho as well. Maybe they're hoping that the Springboks, and they will have a chance. Springboks are always dangerous to go and win the World Cup. You don't want to have major upheaval now. Maybe he's waiting for the time when there's a huge indaba into it. But the situation is clearly unacceptable. We're actually going backwards, because under Jake White and Peter de Villiers as well, there have been a few times where there were actually 7 or 8 players of colour in the Springbok team, and they've gone on to have great victories against Australia in particular. So we can't say that it can't happen overnight. It's been 20 years, and in '95 we had Chester Williams, and now in 2015 we have Brian Abana on the wing and a Zimbabwean-born Beast Matawira in the prop. So the situation is clearly unacceptable at the moment.
Craig, you just quickly touched on young talent there, and I'm sure that, with the likes of Craven Buick and things like that, we see that talent has to be coming through the ranks. But why is it then when it comes to Super Rugby, for instance, and then on a national level, we don't see the talent advancing to those specific squads?
Well, with a Springbok coach like Heineke Meyer and maybe the provincial coaches, they don't have enough confidence in these players. And obviously, Western Province, the Stormers, they had a coach of colour there, Alistair Coetzee, and they were the most transformed team, and they've been the most successful team. So I know Cricket South Africa have done in-depth studies into why that happens. Why do we have players at schoolboy level not going on further on, and it's a lot of socio-economic problems, situations and complications where they've worked out that young players, once they leave school, it's maybe not the same as a white player. They have to try and study, they have to try and find a job and play cricket. So maybe SA Rugby have to have a full-on, be proactive, work out why are players, why aren't the numbers coming up into senior levels. When it comes to this present coach, it's every time there's a 50-50 situation, he seems to go with the white player and not the black player. There have been so many situations. I remember 3 years ago, Siya Kolisi was on top form for the Stormers. There was a test match in Port Elizabeth where he comes from, and he brought in a guy, Jacques Potgieter, from the Bulls. And there's been quite a trend where a guy like J.J. Engelbrecht, instead of Jean de Jong, who's probably the top player in the domestic level. So every time there is a 50-50 situation, he seems to go for players of his choice, and they're normally white players and players from the Bulls. So You know, you don't want to go and run and try and attack the coach all the time. You give him the benefit of the doubt. But after 4 years, he's either I think he's extremely naive and very conservative.
What do you make of that, Dr. Assad, saying that it is our coach that is very conservative, and also that there are so many other socioeconomic factors that come into play when we want to see a full representation of all players in our teams?
No, of course there's socioeconomic factors, but I think I disagree a lot with what's been said by Craig, because we can confuse issues and add a lot of extra content to exactly what's happening. But it's quite clearly that there's a very simple issue at heart here. And the issue is racism in rugby. Craig just mentioned a very important fact. I mean, the best team in the Super 15, Super Rugby has been the Stormers. We're playing with 9 and 10 black players with a black coach. Now, why is it that a black coach can pick many more black players to play than a white coach in this country? Why is it that we have, when we have a white coach, that the 50-50 decisions go the way of the white player? So I think I think the first issue has to be, we have to look at racism and inherent racism before we address that. And rugby has been, inundated with racism throughout its history, throughout its 100-year history. It's not a new thing. It's not something that's come to the fore recently. So I think once we address that issue, and that's part of the lie that's been told to us, that there isn't. We've sort of stamped out racism. We've come from a historic past of racism for 85 years. Springbok rugby had a horrendous history of racism. Suddenly it's gone. Suddenly we're a rainbow nation, and we've forgotten all that. But we're still picking teams based on color. So I think that's the first issue. The second issue is that we have to look at development. If SARU, as the custodians of rugby, and saying we're investing lots of money in rugby, where is that money going? We're not seeing it in historically disadvantaged communities. The players that are coming through private schools and Model C schools, the black players of color. Where's the money being spent in terms of development in regions like Soweto, in regions like Khayelitsha, where there is a desire to play rugby, but there's no opportunity? Why has that not happened in 21 years? We have to ask that question. And I think it's much more simple than we're actually making it out to be.
Is it true, for instance, Craig, that we aren't seeing enough? And we know that with Kusatu's new calls on the minister to act urgently, what is it that we ultimately want to see, gentlemen?
Well, what do we want? Obviously want to see a successful Springbok team. If you win a World Cup, there's no doubt, we saw in 95, 2007, it does lift the spirit of the nation. But we want a fully representative side, that the whole country, the majority of the country, would feel secure in supporting, and that's not really happening at the moment, and hence you've got so many supporters supporting the All Blacks, or not really buying into the South African thing. It's a deeply ingrained problem, and a lot of my colleagues in the media are guilty as well. When Peter de Villiers was the coach, whenever they won, and they won a lot of test matches, they had quite a lot of success. Whenever the team won, according to the media, it was because of the team that Peter de Villiers inherited from Jake White. Whenever the team lost, it was because he wasn't a very good coach. So it is a very deeply ingrained, complicated problem from the media to all sectors of South African rugby. But I wouldn't go and... I mean, a lot of the people running SA Rugby are people of color. I wouldn't say that they're racist at all. But they're certainly not doing their job properly. They are in influential positions. There's been a lot of lip service, and it's time that they got their act together.
Okay, then, Dr. Assad, just from the Anti-Racism Rugby Committee, what is your plea?
Well, our plea is first that rugby is inclusive of all people who want to play rugby in the country. That there isn't an agenda of exclusion, which is the case at the moment. We talk about the leadership being leadership of color. That means nothing if there are other people calling the shots behind that. And I think we must accept that in rugby, that there's a lot of money involved, there are a lot of people involved with other agendas, and that the leadership has failed to include people of color across the country in terms of playing rugby. The plea is quite simple. We cannot say it's too late. We're too late in the process, and we're now facing a World Cup. But when do we review our transformation? We go from Indaba to Indaba. We've done this with the minister, with the current minister, had an Indaba. We've had plans on the table. So why do we now say that it's too late, that we've shown leadership when we haven't? Why is it that people in Soweto still do not play rugby simply because they don't have the facility, simply because they don't have the opportunity to do so? There isn't an appetite at SARU to take rugby into Soweto, to take rugby into other townships. So until that happens, and why we waited 21 years to ask this question? I mean, why has the leadership that we say has been black for so long, why have we waited 21 years to take rugby into areas that are historically disadvantaged?
Well, Craig, I'm just going to quickly wrap up with you today. We're expecting a squad announcement. Is the pressure now on the Springbok management? What are you expecting to see from the announcement today?
I certainly hope that there will be some pressure. I've been reading some reports that the team that will be announced today has 4 black players, and one on the bench. So that'll be a step in the right direction. But there'll still be a lot of players that haven't had opportunities, the likes of Elton, Yankees. Beyond colour, you want to see players have opportunities, especially when you're choosing a World Cup team. And when they don't get an opportunity, and there are a few white players as well that haven't had opportunities to stake their claim to the World Cup, but it's been predominantly black players. So we're hoping that it's sad that it's come to this. You'd hope that the coach would buy into transformation, and one has to feel for these black players. If they've been part of Heineke Meyer's squad for the last 3-4 years and they don't get to play, you can imagine it must be quite demoralizing that deep down that your coach doesn't have confidence in your ability. So we're hoping that the Springboks will do well, that there will be a side that going to the World Cup, which is pretty soon, that the whole of South Africa will support. That hasn't been the case so far. But after 21 years now, a change has to happen, and hopefully it will happen. It certainly came to the fore last week, not just because the Springboks lost, it was the way that they lost, and that the coach is sticking with a largely all-white team that's been very unsuccessful, and there's a sense of injustice that a lot of those players, a lot of the black players aren't getting opportunities. So let's hope that changes going forward.
All right, well, Craig Murray, I thank you so much for joining us from Cape Town this morning. That is our sports reporter from Cape Town. Then Dr. Sid Borat from the Anti-Racism Rugby Committee. I thank you for joining us in this conversation this morning. Definitely an important conversation to have, and I'm sure this is not the last that we're going to be hearing on this debate weeks before we go into the Rugby World Cup. Now, as we've said, the debate over rugby transformation is growing as the Springbok selectors prepare for this announcement. We've been told that squad has been announced, but let's just take a look what your views are on this issue. Gaz says Springboks is being criticized for slow transformation, but how do they respond by awarding the Bok coach with a 4-year contract extension? Ha. Jim says, does race equate performance? I believe players should be selected on merit, not race. #Springboks. Remember, you can send us your views to @SABC Newsroom. Icona says, Meyer has not transformed the team. He has now won the rugby championship, even finished last, and the Springboks have dropped to 5th. Yes, they have dropped to 5th on the world rankings. Then Black Clark says, I'd rather support an underperforming team with deserving players, and in brackets he says they're Australia, than the Springboks. Amai says, tweeting Kusadu there, normal South Africans like me want the best players to play for the Boks, not colour. Pathetic. And your last tweet coming in this morning from Mike says, people must stop complaining. Why now when #Springboks are winning? Nobody is complaining because now there is no excuse of merits to hide. Today's picture of the day comes from Mashabele, captioned, violence erupts as the Greek island, of course, struggles with migrant crisis. Yes, we know the situation there is getting out of control as more migrants have traveled to the island. Now let's take a look at the front pages from around the globe. Starting in the United Kingdom, The Guardian reports that up to 10,000 victims of sexual abuse are estimated to be waiting more than a year for counselling, with thousands potentially never receiving treatment because of the funding crisis gripping specialist charities across the United Kingdom. Moving to New York, the Wall Street Journal says Dutch officials investigating the downing of Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 over eastern Ukraine are examining parts recovered in the area that are suspected of having to come from an anti-craft missile. And finally, in the United States, the Miami Herald reports that 12 people are injured in a fire crash, including 2 children and a grandmother. There you can see scenes of that crash that took place on the front page of the Herald. Well, it's now time to take a break. We'll be back in a bit.
We kick off this week's show by seeing how Kenyans are paying tribute to the victims, as well as not only how they've coped, but how they returned stronger after the attacks.
Last year, images of the 4-day Westgate Mall attack saturated front pages.
In the Democratic Republic of Congo, artists have assembled to celebrate the peace this war-torn country has not had in a long time.
No conflict that can't be solved without a conversation.
The Journal, every Saturday at 1:30 on SABC News.
Welcome back. You're watching Newsroom on SABC News. Now, Greek leaders have warned of a real danger of bloodshed as they've described the situation on the island of Kos to be out of control. Chaos has broken out on the Greek island as authorities struggle with attempts to relocate hundreds of migrants. This comes after 200 others were feared drowned after a boat carrying 700 capsized last week off the coast of Libya. The United Nations has confirmed that more than 220,000 migrants and refugees have crossed the Mediterranean to Europe this year alone. From Amnesty International, we are joined on Skype from London by Matteo De Bellis. Matteo, I thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Matteo, let's just start with this number from the UN. The number of migrants reaching Europe by boat this year has more than doubled if we look at the same period last year. What has been contributing to this escalating number?
Well, it is true that the number has increased. It is broadly similar to the number of people who arrived to Europe last year. It is increased, though, as you say. We must see this in the context of the wider global refugee crisis that we are experiencing. There is a refugee crisis that is being caused by conflicts in many countries, in particular in Syria, and by the fact that people keep escaping countries like Eritrea, Somalia, and many other countries, particularly in the Middle East and Sub-Saharan Africa. They are pushed by conflicts, by human rights violations, by persecution. But the fact that many people feel compelled to take the dangerous sea crossing of the Mediterranean is also related to the fact that in the past few years, Europe have increased efforts to close land borders. So, in fact, channel people towards the sea route.
Now, we know countries like Italy, and we see the current situation in Greece. They are receiving, I can't say most of the refugees, but certainly a very big number of these migrants and refugees coming into their countries. What do you make of the current situation? Kos says things have turned violent. How are these countries prepared to deal with these large numbers of people arriving in their country?
Well, as I said, first we need to look at things in the context. there are many other countries who are receiving many more refugees. 80% of the world refugees are actually staying in the developing world, and we are seeing millions of Syrian refugees in countries like Turkey, Jordan, Lebanon. Europe is complaining a lot, but is actually doing less than others are doing. Certainly, we need to see more solidarity, both from Europe towards outside, but also inside Europe, and a contribution from several European countries to address the immediate needs of the refugees, asylum seekers, and migrants who are arriving during these weeks to Greece and Italy would be important and welcome.
It certainly is a big concern that the migrants who are crossing the Mediterranean, that there have been so many cases of drownings. We know that there is a search and rescue plan called Triton that European countries have put a lot of money towards to make sure that these lives are valued, and that we're not just talking about numbers here, but that we're talking about people that are leaving really difficult situations. And just tell us about the Triton program. Is it doing enough? Because we are seeing so many deaths.
There are different programs that are contributing to saving lives at sea in this moment. Triton is one of these. There are also efforts by individual European countries, and there are also efforts by NGOs. We have to say that there was a dramatic increase in incidents and deaths at sea following the closure of the Mare Nostrum operation that the Italian Navy had conducted for about a year. So at the beginning of this year, for the first 4 or 5 months, we have witnessed an upsurge of incidents and deaths. Following those incidents, you will certainly remember, for example, the 2 major incidents of April 2015. Following those incidents, European governments agreed to launch humanitarian operations to patrol the seas and intervene to rescue people at sea when needed. Now, this has been an important step. We need to see European governments contributing to such efforts with naval assets, with manpower, with finances. We need them to continue to do this, to patrol the seas. But at the same time, we believe that we will keep witnessing incidents as long as we see tens of thousands of people traveling every month irregularly on boats that are unseaworthy and overcrowded. They will be, hopefully they will happen less often, but they will continue to happen. So we really need to take action, reduce the number of those people who are fleeing conflict and persecution and poverty, and see that their only option is to take the sea.
Let's just talk about, you mentioned now the type of boats that these people are traveling on. This is definitely creating a situation or a scenario for criminals to actually exploit these people who want to flee these difficult situations. So what situation is this currently creating if we look at organized crime and issues such as human trafficking?
We are certainly talking about criminal gangs exploiting the situation, but we should make a differentiation between trafficking and smuggling. We see that the vast majority of people we have interviewed who had undertaken the crossing had done so voluntarily. They wanted to take a boat, but they have done this because there were no other options for them available to them to get to Europe. If we are serious about reducing the number of people who end up in the hands of unscrupulous smugglers, we need to open more safe and legal routes to access Europe so that we take the market away from the criminal gangs, we help people to reach Europe in a safe and regular way, and we reduce the number of incidents and deaths.
Matteo, can we expect this crisis to worsen? And just tell us again about the plan that the different European countries have in dealing with this current situation.
Well, actually, the situation in Europe seems to be still pretty confused. They have been talking about a military operation addressing the smuggling and trafficking networks. But actually, we think this is the wrong direction. The right direction is to open more safer legal routes to access Europe. And actually, the steps taken by European leaders in this direction have been very shy. We need them to show courage, the political courage to do the right thing, to open a little bit more the access for people in need of international protection. And we need them to continue and step up efforts to save lives at sea.
Well, Matthias, I thank you so much for joining us this morning on Skype from London.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Well, as we've mentioned, Europe's migrant crisis boils over, and cost police have now to deal with the situation on that Greek island. Let's take a look at what you've been saying on this matter on social media. Ruben says, hashtag migrant crisis continues to worsen. This does not work. Jobs at home is needed. Situation calls for a global development cooperation program. Ronan says migrant crisis on Greece's islands becoming more dangerous. EU needs to provide aid and safety to relocate immediately. The tweet coming in says, where are Corbyn for leader Jezwe Khan left us to tell us about the Islamist slaughter is due to a Western bombing? He's asking a question over there. I'm sure that tweet is coming from Greece. And there we see pictures coming in of the situation. I'm not sure if that is the Kos Island, but definitely we know the situation is tense, where authorities are struggling to register some of those migrants entering that country and on that island specifically. Now, let's take a look at what is happening on our Newsroom Facebook page today. There you'll see the High Court in Pretoria is expected to conduct an inspection to get clarity on how Mozambican taxi driver Mido Masia was handcuffed to the back of a police van before being dragged. Then the United Nations will vigorously and thoroughly investigate allegations of rape by one of its peacekeepers in the Central African Republic. And the United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon last week said they have a big, bold agenda after 193 member states adopted the Sustainable Development Plan for the next 15 years. Well, for all of those stories, just remember you can search for us on Facebook. Just search for SABC Newsroom. You can also visit our website. Just search for SABC /news. It's now time to take a break. We'll be back shortly.
SABC News seeks to be the biggest, the most extensive and diverse news organization on the continent. Our mission is to provide accurate and credible news and current affairs programming throughout the day. We are committed to covering every part of the continent. We reflect the world to Africa and Africa to the world. SABC News, Africa's news leader. Now available throughout the continent.
Corruption is a sad reality for South Africa's so-called rich and poor schools. This has come to light again after the Gauteng Department of Education announced yesterday that criminal and civil charges will be laid against members of the school governing body of Glen Vista High School. It's believed that the school's former governing body operated at least 8 unapproved bank and investment accounts, as well as using unapproved building plans. Now, according to Corruption Watch, about 1,000 cases of corruption in schools have been reported to them. to talk to us about this. We are joined by the Campaigns and Stakeholder Relations Manager from Corruption Watch, Lucky Ronald Menwe. I'm sorry, am I pronouncing that right?
Perfect. Menwe.
Perfect, thank you so much. Okay, but this is a serious issue, Ronnie, and thank you very much for joining us today. You are saying around 1,000 reported cases. So these are cases that we know of corruption within our schools. Have you been contacted by whistleblowers about this? And just tell us how this is being investigated.
The interesting part with the reports that we received is that we started at 68 in 2013 when we launched the campaign. And through our public education to the communities, we managed to raise this number of reports from 68 to over 1,200 to date. It shows that corruption is rife in our public schools. The public didn't have a platform where they can engage and report these experiences, so they would let them go. So since the inception of Corruption Watch in 2012, we have created a platform for them to engage with us, to report these experiences. And just to share with you, they range from schools in rural townships up until in very affluent areas, from just the abuse of the National Nutrition Program, commonly known as the school feeding scheme, corruption in procurement, because every school, especially Section 21 schools, they are procurement points. So each school is procuring because money is being allocated into the account of the school. And then you find that we've got your former Model C schools where parents are actually paying a lot of money for better education for their children, and the money is being misused. So what we do with the reports that we receive as Corruption One, we strategically, because it's very difficult to investigate each and every case that we receive of Corruption Watch. Other than schools, we've received over 11,000 reports of corruption, and then 1,200 of those 11,000 are in public schools. So we would strategically investigate cases that we think that we can use them to educate the public on how corruption manifests itself in schools. And after that, with the remaining cases, what we do, we develop advocacy campaigns where we engage the Department of Basic Education, we form partnerships with other stakeholders who are interested in education matters, but most importantly, we educate the public on how corruption happens in this sector.
Now, Lucky, I don't know in how much detail you can go into with the cases that you are dealing with currently, but I mean, this is very serious, and as we look at the amounts involved here, because if we just take the Glen Vista High School case as an example, they're literally talking about somewhere around 8 million rand. What are the cases that you're looking at currently on a scale from 1 to 10 in terms of the money that you see being misspent?
Well, it depends. If it's schools, like Quintile 1 schools, where the funding for a school is at the maximum of 3 million, we see a lot of mismanagement when it comes to finances. And in most cases, we see a collusion between the school principal and the chairperson of the school governing body, where they shut out all the other members of the school governing body. They don't follow proper procurement processes. And for example, we've received reports where schools, instead of using unemployed parents as food handlers for the school feeding scheme, they employ or they form partnerships with catering companies. So there's a big opportunity for corruption, because what happens is that prices are inflated. Instead of buying a loaf of bread at a cheaper price because you're buying in bulk, we see schools buying a loaf of bread for 25 rand because there's a kickback for so many people, the school principal, the chairperson, and the business still want to make a profit. And then they vary. Other schools will have accounts in filling stations because there's a car in the school, but anyone in the community can just go to the filling station and just mention the name of the school, and you get a full tank of fuel in that particular filling station. So it's a sector that has been ignored in terms of corruption, but ever since we started our campaign, we realized that this is where the learners cannot access learning material. Teachers are frustrated because they do not have learning material to educate the learners, because people are enriching themselves. So we focused on it for that particular reason.
And Lucky, you have really called on parents to be involved and know exactly what's going on and what their school governing body is doing. Because it was concerning when I read up about this yesterday, and you said that so many times people from outside are involved. It's not even parents or anyone from the school. Is it because of what you've explained now, that maybe a principal or someone on that governing body will get someone completely from outside the school to actually act and make some choices?
True. What we shared with the public around the SGB elections 2015 in March this year was that parents must participate effectively in the elections by electing people of a certain caliber to serve on this particular governing boards. People who've got interest. And the Glen Vista saga is very interesting because, remember, this is not a rural school where we're saying the SGB is not informed about their roles and responsibilities. This is an SGB that we have people who occupy very senior positions in government. We've got attorneys, we've got auditors serving on the SGBs. Hence, the type of corruption that we see at Glen Vista High School is a type of corruption that is being properly calculated. People are only enriching themselves. And I think parents get confused because from a school that gets 99% matric pass rate in December and them paying a whole lot of money, they think they're giving their children quality education. Exactly. So they're not interested in what happens to their funds. So this investigation shows that there is corruption. Getting a 100% pass rate does not mean that there might not be corruption in the school.
So you definitely think with this case being covered by the media as it is, it's shedding such an important light of what we're actually faced with in so many schools. Exactly.
A lot of schools are having issues with the SGBs, as I said. In most cases, a collusion between the chairperson of the school governing body and the principals. In most cases, people do raise these issues with their district offices, provincial departments, but what we see happening is that those whistleblowers within the school governing body, they get sidelined. They are not invited to meetings anymore because they are concerned about corruption. They are not informed of the financial status of the schools, and where SGBs are not informed, we see a lot of our parents in rural areas being made to sign blank checks. Because the school principal will say, I don't want you to keep on walking back and forth to school. Sign 20 blank checks so that when I want to procure, I will just put in the amount that I need and my signature, then we can procure. But that creates an opportunity for corruption while the poor SGB treasurer thinks that is assisting the school to run smoothly.
Luckily, just to wrap up, I'm sure a lot of parents are watching this morning, and everyone is not always that involved. You know, you support your child, it's what they do at school, but you're not always certain of the role of your school governing body. Just explain to parents how they can demand to know what's going on within the school, who should they contact, and what really the role is of that governing body so that they know that this type of thing is not happening in the school that their child is going to.
I think the most important part is for parents just to have an interest in the governance of schools. I know it's a very tall order for them because we always say to parents, please go to parents' meetings when you get invited. Remember, children who go to the former Model C schools are mainly from townships. Parents don't have transport money to attend these meetings. But we say to parents, please make it a point that you go to parents' meetings, but engage with Corruption Watch, for example, because we put a lot of material out there for the roles and responsibilities of the school governing body, the role that parents should play in the governance of schools. We educate parents on what is an audited financial statement, because they can go to these meetings, but if they don't know what kind of questions to ask, then it becomes useless because they can be presented with anything and they can agree to it. So if they've got the tools, which is knowledge, that we provide as a civil society organization, then they can engage properly with what is being presented to them, ask the right questions. And most importantly, we make public education material available on our website, and we distribute some in African languages where people can be able to engage with. But when you come across all these corrupt activities, please report to us on our toll-free number.
Please, Lucky, before we end, give us your toll-free number, give us your website so parents watching can do that.
Our toll-free number is 0800 023 456, and we've got a website where they can make a report if they've got access to the internet. It's www.corruptionwatch.org.za.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And there you have it. If you have any concerns about the way maybe the school your child is attending is being run, and if you do know about anything, please report it to Corruption Watch. We'll make all of those details available on our Facebook page as well. Now, today is World Elephant Day, and while many celebrate this great creature, elephants are in grave danger of extinction due to the rise in poaching and trophy hunting. Let's have a look at what you have to say today on this very special day. Please remember you can send all of your views to us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. We've got pictures coming in there of, I think that might be an elephant of India actually. It doesn't look like a South African one, if we can call it that, but it says poaching robs us of another elephant. All we can do is rant on social media. Beautiful photos coming in. All things elephants today in celebration of #World Elephant Day. #protect animals, #elephants. Yes, and we've got even more pictures coming in as we celebrate these animals, protecting our most valuable asset. And she's tagging World Ranger there. Paulina says a reason to join in the celebrations, #World Elephant Day. Let's conserve for generations to come. That's definitely very important, Paulina, and important to remember that on this day. Well, Newsroom is a live broadcast from our studios in Auckland Park in Johannesburg, and we broadcast live every weekday morning between 9 and 10 o'clock. We also stream live on YouTube at the same time, with the show available on demand on our YouTube channel. This is SABC News, and you've been watching Newsroom, where we love it in the morning.